for quite some time and is now joining us for the paper review. A lot to look into the papers, and I think we will start with the Daily Nation. If Jackson, my director, will put that, yes, right behind me. So let's start with the Daily Nation, and what you see right there is the picture of Museveni's son. And it has been the topic of discussion not only on KOT, but that's where it really did pick up, but also picking up on the streets and even in boardrooms, to the extent engaging the foreign affairs teams in Kenya and in Uganda. Because what started with a tweet about Museveni's son, Muhoozi, claiming that it would take 2 weeks to take over Nairobi has now become a topic of discussion and even kind of led to promotion of sorts. We'll be talking to Raymond Mujuni, the NTV Uganda Current Affairs editor, in a moment to give us the inside look of this. But first things first, let's look at this story, Rosalind. Good morning and Karibu. That's been quite an introduction, and now that we have everything framed in this, yes, this, Rosalind Obala, is not something to ignore. Started on Twitter, and we know how powerful Twitter is if Trump is anything to go by. And Muhoozi seems to have taken over the baton from Trump, choosing to use this as a means of sending messages. Do you see it as something serious, or we could just, hey, just tweet it away?
I think it's something serious because we cannot just wish it away. Remember, Muhoozi is not just anybody. He was the commander of the army, and now he has been promoted to the general. But remember, there is a time he had been doing the shuttle diplomacy across the region. Right. He was meeting the heads of state of Rwanda. He came to Kenya. He was in Tanzania. He was in Ethiopia. He has been treating the trips that he has been having. Right. And when he started with even regretting why the retired president Uhuru Kenyatta did not seek a third term, which he indicated that... And they're good friends, by the way. And they're good friends. He calls him his elder brother. And he said the win will have been a sweeping one. Yes. And then he goes on ahead to say that he can raid Kenya within 2 weeks. And he was even asking, where should I stay? Which estate? So for that, I think we can't take it lightly. One, that he's not just anybody. He's the son of the sitting president. He's a commander of the military, in specific the army. Which you can't just say that a general can just speak for the sake of speaking. Right. In terms of the diplomatic relations, you just don't talk about another sovereign state without just thinking what are the repercussions. I saw you were saying that I was just joking, but these were grave threats that you cannot just say that you'll joke with the security of another state. It must be an awkward situation because right now we find ourselves in transition in terms of cabinet. So if there was something to sort diplomatically, how would we go about this? Because we have a cabinet secretary who's nominated, Alfred Mutua, and he did meet with the High Commissioner, Ugandan High Commissioner to Kenya, over tea, making it sound very easy, an easy conversation. But if there was something to really sort out diplomatically, how would we go about it? What's the protocol here? We have a commander-in-chief, but there needs to be protocol as well. Mark, also remember, government exists in perpetuity. Yes. So that means that even with the new administration, we have technocrats, we have people within the Office of the Foreign Affairs. If they had any issues, they know how the diplomatic relations are done if they have any issues. And most of the time, it's not in public display. There is a way they can actually communicate, and the two countries take a position that will be the final stand for the two countries, not just going to tweet. Right. Yeah. And there's something here that if you zoom closer to, you'll be able to see what the Daily Nation has looked into history. And this not being the first time of diplomatic spat between Kenya and Uganda under the leadership of Idi Amin in the 1900s. There was quite you know, an issue there, especially with the founding president, Jomo Kenyatta. And remember that joke? I don't know if you were told, but, you know, the story has it that Jomo Kenyatta sent 2 Land Rovers, and that repelled the Ugandan soldiers. I mean,
that's up to debate on whether the accuracy of the same, but then brings a question of our ability to repel, and even people asking, are we able to repel a threat from Uganda, who have actually been in engagements on the ground in terms of fighting compared to Kenya. We've not really been in an exchange locally or internationally in terms of our forces.
Yes, Mark, we haven't been physically engaged with any of the regional countries or internationally. But remember, our founding president was not similar to the subsequent presidents that we've had.
Yeah.
He was very tough speaking, and he will take a stand to defend the territory of this country. And if you look at even our constitution, it talks firmly on the issue of territorial boundaries. So when you see a foreigner talking about having borderless country of Kenya and Uganda, then it baffles you, because we expect actually to hear firm position from government defending our own territory, because this is how many years down the line that we are now having issues with Uganda.
Yes.
But this is not the first time. Just fast forward just some years back, we were having the issue of the boundary between Migingo, where actually Museveni himself talked about it, and he even made some comments about the Kenyans and the railway and all that. So I think this is not new to us and Uganda. And
just on this point, the Standard also gives focus to it on the front page. Yes, the headline there is deadlock in Ruto-Raila power battle, but they're also looking at tweeting general stirs Nairobi-Kampala ties. With your knowledge of Parliament, would there be any conversation that can be picked up from Parliament on this, or it really doesn't need to get to that turf? Right now, of course, we're looking at majority issues, and that's what we're going to next. But would this be tackled by Parliament?
Yes, it will, because I think it is something that also Parliament needs to talk about. Remember, in the event there is a state of emergency, which is the issue of the boundaries as per our Article 102, then we will have to seek Parliament permission to do anything. So I hope that maybe the members of Parliament or the Committee of Defense, once it is constituted, can actually diverge on this issue, and for Kenya to just take a position on it.
All right. I'm sure wherever he's watching, that is Muhoozi, he is happy that he's gotten the attention. And we'll be talking to Raymond Majuni in a bit. Let's bring it back home, Rosaline, and the issue Speaker Moses Wetangula has to rule on, and that is the numbers in the National Assembly, which is also being discussed in Senate. Given some of the members have been nominated to cabinet, the game of numbers is still at play. Tell us, first of all, why this is important to establish, who the majority is, and then how it will affect the business of the House.
Mark, if you look at our Constitution, and if you look at Article 108 and also the Standing Orders 19 for the National Assembly, it talks about the leader of majority and the leader of minority. Now, the leader of majority should be the leader of the largest party in the House, or the leader of the largest coalition in the House. Now, this is the group that will actually be introducing the agenda of government in the House. And that is why it is very crucial for Kenya Kwanza, because they are the ones in government. But again, there is a question of which is a parliamentary party. So in terms of a parliamentary party, again, it is a party that has the majority, that is the largest party, or the largest coalition. Now, where the question comes in is that Azimio la Umoja One Kenya coalition is a political party. It's not a coalition as Kenya Kwanza. So now that again brings the question, do we have an elected member of Azimio in Parliament? Because for you to become a parliamentary party, you have to have an elected member of Parliament. And that is the question that now the Speaker has to deal with in terms of the legal instruments that were deposited at the Registrar of Political Parties. And this brings us back to the issue of 2013 of the tyranny of numbers. Because when we talk about the tyranny of numbers, Azimio insists that we have the numbers. But do we have an elected member of Azimio as an elected member of Parliament? We do not have. But we have Azimio as a constituency of political parties that have formed a political party.
And just to help us understand, then there will be a delay in cabinet, vetting, or the nominees being vetted. And until that happens, what must play out before we start the actual vetting? Because everyone wants to know, first of all, is it legal that the president has been holding meetings with this outgoing cabinet? Mm-hmm. First of all, answer that.
Actually, you see, the president had actually nominated his cabinet members.
Yeah.
But the speaker has not officially communicated to members of parliament for having been in receipt of that communication from the president. Now, the speaker has actually given the House until Thursday, that is tomorrow, to make a determination on who is a majority in the House and who is a minority. Once they set that the ball rolling, then the next stage is for the clerk, that is the acting clerk, Sarah Kioko, to actually write to the leaders of majority and minority and correspond to the whips of both sides to nominate members to the various committee. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the committee that is very crucial is a House Business Committee that sets agenda for the House, and also the Committee on Appointments, which will be chaired by the Speaker himself. Mm-hmm. So once this committee is in place, and we hope that once this stalemate on the majority is sorted out, that by next week, Tuesday, we will have the names before Parliament for approval. And then immediately the Speaker communicates on the communication from the President on the cabinet nominees. Then they will have exactly 21 days to vet the nominees and approve them in the House.
All right, so it take a while for us to see that play out. I want to get into something here, just a bit, you know, eating into that conversation of the nominations the President has made. On Taifa Leo, Ruto atekeleza BBI kimya kimya. And one point of discussion on this issue, on whether the President is actually effecting the BBI subtly, is the establishment of what we could actually call the Prime Minister's office, what Museveni has been given. He would be the principal secretary or minister in charge of all the ministries, much as it seems that there will be an overlapping between him and the Deputy President. Do you agree with this headline? And is it apt in looking at some of the things that the Deputy President is effecting so far? I mean, the President, beg your pardon. Yes.
Yes, Mark, I totally agree with this headline. The reason is, if you look at some of the takeaways of the BBI, was actually to restructure the structure of government. Yeah. And the reason was that there was a disconnect between the executive and the legislator. Now, if you look at even this position of Prime Cabinet Secretary, they're saying he will be in charge of the legislative process. Now, that means is that through the back door, we're actually having a single leader of government business that is actually not sitting in Parliament, but coordinating all affairs of the legislature and the executive. Two, we also had the issue of not having politicians in the cabinet. And that was also a disconnect, because the problem was that we were having technocrats who were answerable to the appointing authority. Yes. And because of that, MPs were not able to hold them to account most of the time, because even in terms of the unanswered questions and statements which were pending in the House, most of the technocrats were not giving MPs time to appear before the committees to respond to these questions. Now, if you look at Ruto's cabinet nominees, almost 70% are actually politicians. Right. So because of that, you can actually see the BBI is coming through the back door to actually sort out the challenges that they were facing in Jubilee's 2013-2017 time.
Okay, and in the spirit of this, or at least this story that is on page 8, Ruto will soon table a revised budget. In managing the issue of the wage bill, there's a question of whether the CAS position will actually feature in the cabinet in the administration of Ruto, because it's been hanging in the balance there. And there already is a question of how much will be spent in the cabinet that is being formed so far, and then the principal secretaries.
Actually, we already have the structure of the principal secretaries. Remember, they had proposed to have 49 nominees as principal secretaries. But the Public Service Commission had actually reached out to Kenyans for public participation on whether they want the position of chief administrative secretaries. But remember, if you go back to the ruling of 2021 of Justice Anthony Mrima, he actually declared the position of chief administrative secretaries as unconstitutional.
Yes.
And the concern was there was a reason why, as Kenyans and the drafters of the Constitution did not factor in the position of chief administrative secretaries. There was also a disconnect and a feeling among members of parliament that most of the people who were losers in the elections were actually being rewarded by this position, and they were like assistant ministers in government who were enjoying fat privileges and all that, that they as members of parliament who actually went through the ballot were not enjoying. So again, that is another challenge that William has to contend with. But when we go to the issue of revised budgets, this is not the first time that Ruto, even during the time he was the deputy president under President Uhuru Kenyatta, remember there was the austerity measures. We started with the salary cuts, where the executive and MPs were taking 20% cuts. The president started with the deputy, and everyone was to write to the head of public service to volunteer salary cuts. Then in 2018, we came up with the austerity measures, where we again had to cut the budget to save 55 billion. Now we are talking again under the, we are talking about the revised budget to now save 300 billion. I hope to see where that will come from, because already the budget had been passed. So that means that either we are looking into maybe job losses. I don't know how they'll do it. This is not the first time, but in the past regimes, it was done. They are also how to look at places like entertainment, in terms of travels, benchmarkings that we've been talking about, local and international, to see where exactly they can pull this budget hole and just plug it back into the budget. Remember, the president also warned that what we are staring at is a budget ceiling of 10 trillion. We are actually at 9-point-something trillion. And the moment we are not able to plug into the 900 billion that we are talking about, then we are going to have a budget deficit.
All right. We'll be at disservice not mentioning Riggy, the deputy president. And I'll use the headline of The Star, where it goes, new DCI tells off DP Gachagua over investigation style, multi-agency squad to oversee implementation of audit commendations. The deputy president has been on a roll in terms of his appearances on camera, speaking to what the Star has chosen to look into and how he has styled himself as, you know, shooting from the hip. And then yesterday, as we've seen in Ibrahim Karanja's story moments ago, he had to reassure his boss, the president, that his loyalty remains to him. Some people might say in the last couple of weeks, he's been outshining the boss. Are there some whispers in the corridors of power on how this has played out?
I think we need to look at it in what context will we feel that maybe he's trying to outshine his boss. Some of the political undertones that came up at his brother's funeral was that people were telling him, yes, you've been speaking, but you shouldn't shy away from speaking your mind, which is very good. But going by what we have seen in the past, where the current president, when he was the deputy president, had issues with his boss on how he was articulating his issues and taking positions, I think that will actually cause a rough patch going forward. And I think that's why Rigathi was even able to go passionately and say, we had a night meeting with the family, and I committed to them that I'll be very loyal to the core, because integrity is the cornerstone of everything. It wasn't warranted to actually reassure his boss of his loyalty, but going by what we have seen, in fact, he has been the face of the Hustler administration, talking left, right, hitting it for wherever it is. But going back to the issue of DCI, remember we had the multi-agency task force that was chaired by the Attorney General. It's like the entire team is quitting, because we've even seen the IG has resigned. We are seeing the DCI is no longer there, so cabinet secretaries, people are coming on board, the interior and the other. But the question is, will we put politics in terms of security? Because we had forced, even in terms of intelligence, there was coordination, and this arises from what we saw at the Westgate and also the other attacks that we have. So going forward, how will the Hustler administration deal forcefully with the security sector without victimization of officers who have been doing their job.
I mean, something to watch keenly on whether or how the Deputy President will deal with the DCI and others, because we do know he has, you know, a checkered history with them. His arrest, which was quite embarrassing, and he spoke about it during the campaign trail. Are we going to see an objective leader in terms of how he engages with these agencies, multi-agency investigative agencies, moving forward, given their history?
I hope they're going to remain professional. Remember, President William Ruto has repeated so many times that he will ensure his administration, civil servants stick to doing their job and politicians do the politics. And he said that the toxic environment was informed by the civil servants actually engaging in politics. And that's why you say that some particular time, the politicians who are around him, there was the weaponization of corruption. And that is why he was assuring that he will support them and ensure they remain independent. One of the first executive orders that he signed was to ensure there is financial autonomy in the office of the Inspector General. And I hope that by taking that step, he will allow the security agencies to do their job without interference from his office or any of his officers.
All right, let me just quickly refer to the Business Daily and what they've headlined there. No mention here or, you know, conversation on it. But Indian firm Canafric buy Britannia biscuits for 1 billion shillings. But what will definitely raise eyebrows here is Safaricom value dips below the trillion-shilling mark after U.S. rates hike. You can read more on that on this story from the Business Daily. And yes, Taifalea, we've looked at. I want us to finish with this issue, which has featured on the front page of the Star, on the Standard, and that is what lifting of GMO ban means to food security. Well, the Standard goes with the different opinions from experts on this issue. Let's talk about this in the name of Parliament. Is there any way that Parliament can step in the interest of the public to either stop the process and or revisit it, just the same way that the CBC issue is being revisited through a task force, because it's been brought in very, you know, tactfully in the name of solving the drought situation? Is there anything Parliament can do?
Yes, there are things the government can do. This was a cabinet resolution.
Yes.
And it has to come to Parliament for ratification. One of the things that will be required is that Parliament must pass the statutory regulations to actually enforce the directive of the cabinet. But remember, a lot has been said about this. Remember, the ban was in 2012 under the regime of the late retired Moi Kibaki. 10 years down the line, we are actually lifting the ban.
Yes.
There was a reason why we had put the ban on GMO. And some of the feelings that people are saying is that maybe the Western nations have put pressure on government to actually lift the GMO. But now what is required is that even as Parliament decides to ratify this decision, we must do the public participation to inform Kenyans on the importance and the benefits or the dangers of GMO. Because the decision that was taken by the cabinet, they must explain it to Kenyans. Because 10 years down the line, what is the urgency? Because we are just second after South Africa. And in the region, it is Kenya that is the first country to lift the ban.
All right. This is a big story, and that's why it's the concern of focus for this morning. We're having the National Biosafety Authority representative, the Assistant Director of Training on that front, to answer all the questions. And we'll be opening the lines to you to ask your questions from where you sit, because you are an expert by virtue of being at the receiving end of this. Rosalino Bala, thank you for this. We have quite a bit to look into in terms of what is in the news diary, what with the MPs to debate President Ruto's speech, CRA meeting on county's own source revenue, journalists to protest the jailing of editor, TSC to award teachers who excelled in 2021 national exams, and Matatu operators operation set to be affected over strike from the NTSA new regulations, something to look out there. But I know you sit in the board of the Media Council. This is a story of interest. Journalists to protest the jailing of editor. What's going on there as we finish this?
Yeah, actually there was an editor, the Tuko editor, who was jailed, who was actually fined 50,000. But yesterday the magistrate actually set aside the bond and decided to jail the editor for 1 week. Today, again, there is another decision that will be taken against KBC, again on the same reporting that they had done. So I think this is something that is actually a blow, a setback to press freedom, and the media must just, the journalists must just come out and defend their space.
All right, I'll let you go. Thank you for joining us for the